Hey, everybody, before we start, I want to thank two brand new Patreon supporters, Kelly McDermott and Kendra Medors. Both Kelly and Kendra signed up to be Patreon supporters, which means they support on either a monthly or annual basis. There are options for supporting via Patreon for as little as $2 a month. And as I've said many times before, and I'll say many times again, Patreon is the financial foundation of all things Mountain and Prairie. So thank you to Kelly and Kendra for signing up. And thanks to everybody else who's signed up over the years. It really, really does make a difference. Secondly, another way you can support the podcast is through the Mountain and Prairie shop. And the reason I'm talking about that is because I just put 3 brand new coffee mug designs in there. They're my Theodore Roosevelt themed designs, and they're 3 different mugs with 3 different quotes from Theodore Roosevelt. There are 3 of my favorite quotes of all time. I have them written all over my shed, have them written in my books. Now I have them on my coffee mug. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested, just go to mountainandprairie.com/shop, and you can check those out and check out all the other cool stuff in there, shirts, stickers, mugs. I think it's pretty cool stuff. It seems like other people do too. And I really appreciate everybody who's bought it over the years. When I was at the Old Salt Festival in Montana a few weeks ago, I saw a lot of people wearing Mountain and Prairie t-shirts, which I thought was so cool. So thank you to Patreon supporters. Thank you to everybody who has supported through buying shirts or mugs or stickers at the shop. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Christy Singh Robertson. Christy is a hat maker and the founder and owner of Singh Hat Company. Based in Jackson, Wyoming, Christy has evolved rather quickly from making a few hats for herself and several friends into becoming one of the most popular and sought-after hat makers in the West. Whether she's hand-shaping palm leaf hats for hundreds of people at events like last month's Old Salt Festival, or creating a custom felt hat for a fifth-generation rancher or celebrity musician, Christy's humility, curiosity, and commitment to the craft have allowed her to stand out in the crowded field of custom hat makers. Christy was born and raised in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, and she stayed there for the first half of her career, working as a high-performing salesperson in the insurance industry. But despite her success in the conventional and lucrative world of sales, she felt called to the West and decided to uproot her life and move to Jackson, Wyoming. Even though she moved to Jackson without knowing a soul, she managed to establish roots and build a fulfilling life centered around motherhood, hard work, and leading a thoughtful, intentional life. And along the way, just as she had felt called to move to Wyoming, she felt called to make hats, so she went all in. Today, Christy's hats and her long list of customers demonstrate the amazing success she's achieved in a relatively short amount of time. I've been following Christy's work for many years now, so I was thrilled to finally have a chance to chat with her on the podcast. Her story is amazingly inspiring and speaks to the importance of grit, risk-taking, working hard, humility, and trusting your gut. We covered a lot during our hour together, including her upbringing in Arkansas and her success in the insurance business, the spiritual event that led her to move to Wyoming, how motherhood changed her, the focus and hustle required to make ends meet as a single mother, hunting big game for food, balancing the artistic side of hat making with the all-important need to earn a living, the increasing wealth inequality in Jackson, the importance of friendships with other artisans and makers, why imposter syndrome can be a good thing, techniques for keeping an even keel, favorite books, and much more. If you haven't checked out Christy's website or followed her on social media, I recommend that you do. There are links in the episode notes to all that, plus links to everything else we discussed. But in the meantime, I know you'll enjoy this inspiring and motivational conversation with Christy Singh Robertson. Christy, I'm going to go ahead and give a disclaimer at the beginning of this podcast that my Southern accent is getting ready to go into overdrive, because whenever I talk to somebody else with a Southern accent, it's just like it raises the stakes. And then that person's accent gets thicker, and then mine gets thicker, and it goes up and up and up and up. So you don't care, but if anybody's listening, they're like, what in the world's going on? I'm going to blame it on you. So
I'm going to be in the same boat.
All right. Well, I'm so excited to have you on here. We've been connected online and through mutual friends and everything for so long. I mean, like probably 5 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I've long been interested in your work. And then we had the pleasure of hanging out on the weekend at the Old Salt Festival a few weeks ago, and we finally got this thing scheduled. So thank you for taking the time. But I was wondering if we just start at the very beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Russellville, Arkansas, which is in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Town of about, 40,000. I'm probably off on that because I've been gone so long. That's mostly where I grew up. Like a little bit in another little town in Arkansas, Mount Magazine, but the majority of the time that I was in Arkansas was in that little town.
That's about the town where I grew up in North Carolina is like 10,000 people, but I feel like that kind of 10 to 40,000 at least in that part of the South is kind of similar in a lot of ways. When you were growing up, what were you like? I mean, were you artistic? Were you always making stuff, or did that not kind of become part of your personality till later?
I wish I could say I was. I was not. I was not a maker when I was young. I really came into that later in my life, the artistic side. So when I was young, my parents were divorced, so I was kind of raising little sisters when I was young. I didn't have a super exciting, creative childhood, to be honest.
In some ways, I think that can be a benefit because like I was not a very good athlete growing up or in high school. I mean, I was always trying to play team sports and I was like middle of the pack, if not, the back third of the pack. But I think because of that, I finally found something I can do, which is like just, boneheaded endurance sports. But I think it's almost like because I didn't do it at a level I wanted to when I was a kid, it makes me want to continue doing it now, even at age like 45. So I don't know if it's the same kind of thing for creativity, but you obviously found it at some point.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also wasn't athletic as a child.
Really?
We were pretty poor. My mom was single. There were 4 of us. I was the oldest. So, there wasn't just a lot of extra money for things that we wanted to do that weren't absolutely necessary. So we just, I was born in the 70s. So we played outside and hung out and, hung out with neighbors and had each other. And that was kind of our fun. Made do with what we had, and we weren't permitted to participate in a lot of extracurricular sports or activities because there just simply wasn't there weren't funds for that or time to go around between all of us with my mom. So really we just kind of made do. And I will say for sure it made me a much tougher, stronger person as an adult, made me want to achieve so much as an adult. And so I feel like it was a benefit, even though it didn't seem like it at the time.
I think the answer is pretty obvious here. Was your mom a pretty hard worker, pretty focused worker? Because it seems like that's one of the many things I've noticed about you is just, you've obviously got the artistic talent and the creativity, but at the base of everything, it seems like you're not the slightest bit afraid of extreme hard work. Would you credit that? Would you credit your mom with setting that example?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My mom is a super hard worker, sometimes a couple of jobs or more, always doing whatever she had to do to provide for us. So that lines up.
Well, I want to talk about that as we're talking about your business now, but we'll get to that in a second. So you grow up there in Arkansas, go to high school. Then what happens when you get out of high school?
Well, obviously college was an option, but I didn't feel like it was an option for me at that time. So I began working in the insurance industry just as a receptionist and doing, I always did odd jobs and lots of different things. I always had multiple jobs, waited tables, gardened, whatever would pay the bills. And just, I liked a lot of different things. I liked working a lot, and I was single for a really long time. So that turned into a sales job in insurance. And then I moved on and worked for Aflac for about 7 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. And that turned into management positions. So that really turned into a pretty lucrative career at the time. And I just never looked back to college after that.
Yeah, well, that's smart. You don't need to. I mean, I feel like, I had the great fortune to go to college, but in some ways I feel like I I learned how to draw supply and demand curves, and I can't really tell you that I've been able to use that to make money.
Yep. I understand that.
But I think I think a lot of the people, probably like half the people I have on the podcast in the creative field, half went and studied, art or whatever, and the other half didn't go to school and are self-taught. And I always admire people who can make that decision, because there's such a kind of a societal pressure, that you got to go to college, but you really don't. And so I think I really admire that. And so when you're in the insurance business and you're kind of doing that, were you making things at that point? As an adult, had that started coming out yet, or were you just fully focused on work at that point?
I loved like design and home and design and garden, and I loved fashion. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't say I was not creative. I wasn't making things. My grandmother sewed for a living. My sisters could sew. My mother sewed a lot. She sewed a lot of our clothing when we were young. But honestly, every time I sat down at a sewing machine or, to hand sew something or knitting, that work was really frustrating to me. I didn't have the patience at the time to learn those kinds of things. And I didn't really have the interest. I was kind of all go back then. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of hustle, and I really enjoyed that at that time in my life. And so sitting quietly, probably from some old trauma, I wasn't able to just sit really quietly and do things that were meditative at that season in my life at all. It didn't interest me.
That's interesting. And so, it sounds like you had a successful career going that you could have continued. My dad was in the insurance business for basically his whole career, and you could have kept building on that and evolving that career. But at some point, the Rocky Mountains kind of captured your attention and your imagination. How did that come about?
Well, that's kind of a crazy story that people probably roll their eyes or wonder about me when I tell it. But
good, honestly, I love crazy stories.
But honestly, I was just really happy, actually, in my life in Arkansas, and really happy with the insurance job that I'm really happy with Aflac. They always did what they said they would do. They treated their clients well, my clients well. And I didn't have a hard time selling that product, because they really showed up when it was time to pay a claim. So I really enjoyed that. Was very happy there. And honestly, I was driving home from work on a spring day, and strangely, as clear as a bell, I heard, "You're going out west," out of the clear blue sky. And I had traveled a bit with Aflac, a little bit internationally and across the country on just incentive trips that I'd won.
Yeah.
But I had not considered really moving. I really was very happy there. And so it came out of the blue so strongly that I immediately began to look into it. And so at first I kind of was like, well, what does that look like? And I'd known a kid in town that had worked at a guest ranch in Colorado, and that I looked down that avenue and it didn't work out. And a couple of people that lived in my town that I was friends with had met out here in Jackson. Mm-hmm. And I said, what about, do you guys have any idea of someone I could call about a job? And so they set me up with a great guy here in town who knew and knows everyone. And I got some contacts from him and found a job between here and Pinedale.
Yeah.
And I just decided to leave my contacts and all my clients with my colleagues for just a few months and come out just for the summer. So I came to a ranch that's no longer in operation and worked. It was in the middle of nowhere. And
what was it called?
It was called the Flying A Ranch.
Okay.
And I got there on a weekend, and I knew right away it wasn't going to be my place. I had just left a ton of nieces and nephews in Arkansas that I was super attached to. It was an adult only place. They didn't allow any kids. It was pretty party heavy. Mm-hmm. And so I knew after week one, it was probably not going to be a fit for me. And I didn't want to leave them in a bind. So I kind of came to town and scouted around a little bit and ended up meeting someone on a Sunday at Lost Creek Ranch. And she hired me right away. And so, of course, I had to go back and say, I'm so sorry to leave you guys in a bind, but this is not, I can tell this is not going to be a fit for either of us. So ended up at Lost Creek Ranch for the summer, which was wonderful, magic, and intended to only be here for the summer. But, was here till October or so and drove back to Arkansas and thought that was it. But it turns out here I am.
So first of all, when you said that you heard a voice telling you, was it the kind of thing? So, and if you don't want to go into details, you don't have to, but I'm curious, like, was it as if you actually heard like a voice, like there was a voice in the car with you, or was it in your head, or maybe you don't even really know? Like, it
was certainly in my head. It wasn't in my car. It was in my head, but it was, in my opinion, in my belief system, it was the voice of God, and it was so out of the blue. It wasn't something I was searching for that I knew of. Mm-hmm. So
did you fight it off? Like, did you be like, that's not for me. Like, I got this great job here. That's kind of a crazy, crazy idea. I mean, did you try to write it off, or was it the kind of thing where it was so powerful, you're like, well, that's what I got to do?
I didn't try to write it off. It was so powerful. It was 100% what I was going to do. Now, I knew I had to figure out the method, but it was like there wasn't a question, almost as if it wasn't a choice, but not in a negative sense.
Yeah.
It was a very exciting opportunity for me.
And during that summer and into the fall, like, how, if you can even kind of think about it from a detached perspective, like how did you change? Because I remember when I moved to Jackson Hole, that's where I moved, from North Carolina, and kind of probably similar age. I guess I was like 27 when I moved out there. And I remember very quickly over the course of a few months, I felt like I had changed as a person, mostly for the better, just kind of seeing this whole new place that I'd never even been except for my job interview. Yeah. And now I was living there. When you look back on that, summer, fall, how did it change you?
Oh, so profoundly. Like I said earlier, I had been hustling for so many years, probably a good majority of my life in every sense of the word. And, in the South, dressing up every day to go to work, full makeup, full hustle. I can't emphasize the amount of hustle I was doing always in every way. And so just to come here and make, I know it wasn't $5 an hour, but it feels like maybe it was, to scrub toilets and have one day off a week was so liberating. I didn't have to think about anything except for which cabin to clean and what time I got off and what everyone was doing on, our day off, and just the beauty, because Lost Creek is located in Grand Teton National Park. So it was just incredible, breathtaking beauty around me 24/7. And just the lack of real responsibility for the first time in my life it took such a huge load off. It was, I would say, it was definitely one of the happiest times of my life.
That's really cool. And so you go home in October, go back to work, I'm guessing. And then how long did it take you before you realized, all right, I got to go back?
Yeah, well, just getting off my exit was, because I drove back home, was not a good feeling. I didn't have a good feeling, which was ironic because I hadn't thought I ever wanted to leave. I mean, I was been perfectly happy, but I was just so changed. So I wasn't really thrilled when I even got off my exit, but I thought, well, that's too bad. So I did go back to work, and it wasn't long before I was pretty high performing agent for them. So it wasn't long before they were asking me to be in management.
Yeah.
It wasn't long from the time I got back. And they, I was interviewed in several different states for that. And as I came back, I didn't feel the same about the place when I was there. I wasn't super excited to be back. But I was back a whole year, an entire year. So I interviewed for a job in Cleveland and a job in Virginia Beach, and I took that job. And I went to Virginia, took a load of things. I was actually staying in a home of some people that I'd met at the ranch.
Oh, wow.
Which was ironic, but I was there 72 hours before I said, this is not my place. I'm not trying to get to the east. I'm trying to get to the west. And I loaded my stuff up. Hey, so that's two times I've left a job that I signed up for. That's probably not great character qualities.
It all lines up in hindsight. I'm sure at the moment, though, I think when people, I've been thinking about this a lot, when people have built these successful, interesting kind of careers or lives, it's kind of funny. It can be kind of funny to look back, because I'm not saying I've got a successful or interesting life, but like when I have found something that I enjoy doing and that I'm halfway good at, and I kind of laugh looking back on my time at Merrill Lynch when, I hit my goals and everything, but like I would make prank phone calls all day and do all this funny stuff.
Yeah.
But at the time, like, it's funny to say that now, but at the time it can be very disheartening, because you're like, what the hell am I doing? Like I can't, nothing's clicking. And so like it's lined up for you now, but I imagine that was pretty tough in the moment. You're probably like, what am I going to do?
Yeah, I did. It wasn't like I knew I was coming to Wyoming right then. Yeah. I just knew that I wasn't supposed to be there. And I'd taken that job probably with a little, pressure is not the right word, but encouragement to move up. I knew I could sell. I wasn't sure I could motivate other folks to do that, and wasn't sure I wanted to manage people in that way. So yeah, I drove back to Arkansas shortly after 72 hours later, and just kind of worked there for the remainder of the year and worked pretty hard. I'd say that was probably in like April or May, and just, enjoyed my time in Arkansas. But I'd won a trip to New York through Aflac, and was on an elevator on Fifth Avenue going up to my hotel. And as clear as day, I heard, "You're moving to Wyoming January 1st. And I did.
That's awesome.
I had never driven in snow.
Oh, you were there in the depths of it.
Yeah, you're not going to drive in snow in Arkansas, because that's basically ice. So, I moved out there January 1st, and my parents came with me, my mom and stepdad. And somewhere right inside the Wyoming line, my stepdad pulled over and said, "Okay, you drive." And that was my introduction to Wyoming driving.
What year was this?
This was in 2005 when I moved here permanently, which is, I think, the same year you came.
It is. I showed up in September of 2005. Yeah. That's crazy. That's super interesting. And so what did life look like? I mean, because that was the thing. One of the first things that struck me when I was there, because I got there in September, and I remember I went to work on September 15th, and there was like 2 inches of snow that night. And I was like, what the hell? And then it kept snowing, and I didn't see the ground again until like mid-April. And I just I couldn't get my head around that amount of snow, that amount of short days. And I mean, I loved it because it was kind of an adventure, but it was quite a change for me. I mean, so what was your life like? I mean, what'd you do for work? What was life like for that first maybe 6 months until it thawed out?
Yeah. Well, so I moved to Alpine, actually. So down the canyon about, whatever, I don't know how many miles it is, 40 or whatever it is. I didn't know a soul there. My furniture didn't come for 30 days. So, but I moved with Aflac. So I took a management position for the state of Idaho for Aflac. And so I lived in Alpine. I drove, to Idaho Falls or wherever most days. And it was so lonesome, but the beauty was so intense that, there was no doubt I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But of course I missed my family. I knew only the people that I'd met when I lived here for the summer. So, and they were all in Jackson. So, it's quite lonely, but also very clear that I was where I was supposed to be. And I only lived there for 6 months.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, was when it was lonely like that, did you ever think, oh man, I made a mistake here?
I don't know that I don't really feel like I ever felt like I made a mistake. I just think I was lonely.
I remember when I moved there, I was in an apartment kind of by myself, and I eventually got a roommate like a month later. But I remember I was there and I was completely alone. I didn't really know anybody other than the people I worked with, and it was like a duplex, and the people underneath it was like like couple, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. They got in this massive fight one night, and the cops came, and they were like, one of them like screeched out in the yard in this big truck, and I was in there all by myself, and I was like, I may have made a mistake here.
Yeah. Yep.
This is scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I was scared in weather for sure. I was scared driving plenty, when there was a blizzard and I was, driving from Idaho Falls or driving the canyon to Jackson or, but she learned that pretty quick.
So when did hat making enter the scene? I know we may be skipping a few years. If I'm skipping anything, let me know. But like, I'm very curious how you went from this success in sales and in management and insurance into craftsmanship. And so when did that enter the picture?
It wasn't that long ago, actually. I've only been making hats since 2017, and I
didn't realize that.
Yeah, it hasn't been very long. 5 or 6 years, I guess.
So we skipped a lot of years.
Yeah, we did. But they're all part of leading up to this. But in essence, I got married and had 2 children, 2 small children, and they aren't very far apart. So I really started to practice the anti-hustle when I got married, and realized how much I wanted to slow down my life and how much I wanted to be present when my kids were little. And it's funny because I thought I just wanted to be present when they were little, but now that's still what I want. And so I had some renewals from Aflac that lasted a really long time that allowed me to kind of be home a little bit. And it was 2008 when my daughter was born, 2009 when my son was born. So times weren't great, but we had, we were secure, and so I didn't really worry a lot about that. I just kind of stayed home with them. And I couldn't imagine hustling up anything else. I was just tired of that. Yeah. So I began to garden and just connect to the land and food and hunt. Wasn't hunting quite yet, hunting with my ex-husband, but not by myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, those years were just years of kind of hustling, doing whatever I needed to do, but not more than I needed to do.
It may be challenging to talk about, but I've seen it with my wife, and then I've seen a version of it with myself. How you change when you have kids. And like before I had kids, I used to see people that had like successful careers, or I'd especially see people that did like all these really hardcore, month-long outdoor adventures, like in the big mountains. And then when they had kids, their priorities changed and they'd be doing other things. And, before I had kids, I think, oh man, they had kids and now they can't do that kind of stuff anymore. They can't work as hard. They can't go on these adventures. But then after I had kids, I learned that, at least for me, I don't want to do that stuff. Like, I don't want to be gone for a month. I don't want to be like working staying at the office till 8, 9 o'clock at night or any of that kind of stuff. Like I want the kids are the number one priority. And I feel like with you, in every conversation we've ever had, the conversation doesn't go by without it coming back to your kids, which I love because that's how I am. And so is there any thoughts on that about kind of this transition away from the hustle of making money and having a really high performing career to putting all that energy into raising these humans that you created?
Yeah, well, so much about that. I'm sure people are so sick of me talking about my children. But
this is my podcast. This is for me. I appreciate the listens, but this is for me.
Yeah. Well, so, that's exactly what happened. I was just so enamored with hustling and having a great career, and I just enjoyed it so much. But then when they came along, I don't know that I put 2 and 2 together, but I think my mom's hustle was so necessary to feed us. It's so intense, and she was gone so often working that I subconsciously, I think at first it was subconscious, I just didn't want that.
Yeah.
And I've probably overdone it and been a bit codependent, if we're being completely honest. But I just didn't want to miss any of it. I didn't want them to come home from school, or come home from anything and me not be there. So in those early days, we lived in a cabin on the edge of the forest, and my ex-husband was generous enough to let us stay there when we divorced, and the kids were quite young. They were 2 and 3. And so, we had spring water. I had a paid for car, and I could just do what I needed to do to get by. I learned to hunt because we needed meat and garden and all the things, And so I feel like I was pretty self-sustaining is not the right word. Self-sufficient is not the right word, because I certainly had a community of the kids' family here and friends and I worked. But I did a lot at the house to keep me from having to have to earn a lot of money so that I was able to be with them. I always negotiated lower pay for higher freedom for myself. And I waited tables. I worked, I gardened, I sanded furniture. I kind of just did whatever I needed to do to be with them during that time.
And when you go back into your head, back in those times, was it, obviously you're super focused on the kids, but was it ever almost like a frantic feeling like, oh shit, I gotta do more. I make more money. Or was it, do you think was it a pretty content period of your life?
There were very few times where I was like, oh gosh, I got to make more money. There weren't very many times like that. I just had such low overhead. I didn't have any debt. I didn't have any, I fortunately didn't have to pay anything to live in that house. I was so fortunate. And I grew some food, although our growing season here is pretty short, but I preserved a little, and I was thrifty, and we bought hand-me-down clothes for myself and for the kids. And it was slow living, and it was the happiest, most magical time of my entire life.
That's awesome.
It was great.
And it's when you say slow living, that's just so opposite of everything now. Even take the career stuff out, just the way that all this electronic media, social media and stuff is just kind of getting everybody so hyped up all the time. That seems very appealing in a lot of ways. Hunting. Can you talk about how you said you had gone with your ex-husband, but I'd love to hear how you became, kind of self-sufficient in hunting, because I'm a relatively new, I was a late bloomer when it comes to hunting. And I just a year ago, shot my first elk.
I remember that.
And I loved it. But it was one of these things where I don't know if I ever would have figured out how to do it on my own if it weren't for the help of Adam Gall, who's been on this podcast and who guided me on the first hunt. So how did that become a part of your life?
Well, my ex-husband was a hunting guide, and so we'd had meat, forever. And I loved it and knew likely couldn't afford to not do it that way because of just my belief systems about food, and also my, the financial situation that I was happily in. And so a friend, I went through all the necessary hunter safety, and then a friend took me shooting a few times and took me one night. And honestly, it was a beginner's luck. We shot a few rounds at the gun range. I borrowed a rifle. For honestly, the first several years, I borrowed a rifle. And we went out, and I had an elk down. I saw it. It wasn't very many yards away from me, probably, I'm not kidding, 50. Mm-hmm. And I dropped it first shot. It was beautiful. I would say my hunting since then hasn't been as successable every single time. But yeah, I remember him asking me after we were finished, how do you feel? And I said, I feel like provision. Like I've made provision for these kids for this next little bit. And really, that's all hunting's ever been about for me. I love walking in the woods, and I do that on a daily basis, winter and summer, all year round. But I don't hunt for any reason except that we need to fill the freezer.
Yeah, and I feel like, at least in my experience, once you get that freezer full and you see your kids eating it, and it becomes such a part of everything, I just can't imagine not doing it. And I was 44 when I first did it. I'm not, but, and I've got, I think maybe one day I could get excited about trying to chase, certain animals in the big mountains and all that. But for now, it's just like, if I can get a shot from less than 100 yards and take down a cow and have 150 pounds of meat, I'll do that all day, And so that's cool.
That's really exactly cool. The boat I'm in. I'm really doing it to feed. But I look, I don't want to rush by any time with these kids, but I do look forward to time when a little bit more time can be spent on on different types of hunting and, but right now it's really, truly, it's not like, oh yeah, I'm good. It's a squeezing in a day or two and then, trying to get it done or else there's not time to do it.
We're in the same boat there.
Yeah.
All right. So back to the
hats.
hat. Yes.
So hats.
No, that was a very, I'm glad we talked about that. I do all my research, but I don't know what was going on. Cause I figured you've been doing it a lot longer than that, which is a testament to your skill.
Well, thank you. So this is, again, it sounds crazy. I had saved my little bit of money, when I was single for us. I wanted a Stetson open road hat, and it wasn't because I wanted to shape it myself. It was because I wanted a certain shape. And I knew I probably wouldn't be the one to shape it. My dad can shape hats a little bit. And I knew plenty of, cowboys around here, or people that could have shaped hats. And so I knew I could find somebody, but turns out when it came, it wasn't open crown because they don't sell those to just the regular Joe, or I couldn't find one. And so there had been a woman that owned the Jackson Hole Hat Company here for years, the original owner. And she had a little junk shop in town, kind of a little consignment, kind of a little just antique shop. And she still shaped hats and carried some vintage hats. And so I took it into her and asked her to shape it for me, which she gladly did. And we just had a great chat that day. I left with a hat I really loved. And I got into my car on a Tuesday, sat down, and as clear as I'm talking to you, I heard, "You will make hats." I'm not kidding. I am generally, it's not that I'm not searching for things in my life or that I don't want change. It's just, I'm generally a hard worker, and I generally just do the lot that's in front of me. I may bitch a lot, but I do the lot that's in front of me. And then I just do the next thing. Yeah. And it's always worked for me not to be searching for what my thing is. If you just go to work, your thing's going to find you, I think. And so I got a little giddy. I was like, what? Really? That's like, so odd.
You again? I have to do what you say. So
yeah. And what's funny is I was working remotely for a woman in Fort Worth at the time. I'd gotten this gig. It doesn't matter. Long story, but she had been wonderful to me. And so I'd been able to stay home with the kids and then just travel a little bit to certain areas. So I had a little time to investigate this. And so I began looking for an apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. And I could not find one. And so after about 3 months of looking, I just kind of was like, all right, God, if this is you, I'm going to let it come to me. And I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm not going to get hung up on this. I heard this thing. I'm supposed to do this thing. I've looked, and that's that. And a month or two later, I walked back into the same woman's shop that shaped my hat. And she said, "Hey, I found a place you can apprentice," which I'm not going to name on here. But I contacted them and did an apprenticeship. And the way I did it, I had my kids most of the time. They went to their dads on weekends and so forth, but they were with me most of the time. And so I would send them down for a long weekend or a couple of weeks and save my money, rat hole my money to go down and pay for this apprenticeship. And I would just do it every, so often, every month or two, I would go down for a stretch of time.
Yep.
And I was just learning and still working and still being mom, doing all the things. And it was a real stretch for me, financially and in every way, because I was already stretched pretty thin. I had already been about 7 years as a single mom. So wow. I was, stretched pretty far already.
And so again, similar question to what I asked earlier, when you're doing that and you're heading out to go do this apprenticeship and it's costing money and it's definitely not the path of least resistance, is there ever a point where you're like, ooh, maybe I need to reconsider this?
I don't remember that happening. I'm sure there were times where I said, damn, this is really hard. I don't know if I questioned if it was the right thing to do. I just knew it was difficult. Listen, I didn't sew a button on before this.
Yeah, that's what's so wild. It's both with moving to Jackson. It didn't, it's not like you had grown up going out there every summer as a kid and you had this, it was just move to the West and then the hat making in the best way, it's just kind of, it's random,
It's super random, but it's also has to be so intentional because it was so not me. It was neither of those things were something I was seeking to do, or I wasn't looking for the thing to make the next change. I just was trying to faithfully kind of go about my work in both cases. And so, to be honest, it kind of handed me my rear end. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing at all. I mean, I would FaceTime my mom to sew. It was just really not me. It wasn't my gift. And so it really took a lot of extra work because I'm not naturally a maker. I would say I have a good eye, but making was not a normal skill set for me. And so it was challenging.
When did it click? I mean, when did you kind of break through and you're like, oh, all right, I am good at this now, or I know how to do this, or I see the trajectory is going in the right direction to where I might not be good now, but I'm pretty confident I will be, a year from now or whatever. When did that happen?
Like last week. No, honestly, it was a long time. To be honest, what happened was this woman that had kind of sent me on this apprentice path gave me a little spot in her shop a block down from where I am right now and said, you can make hats in here and I'll charge you 10% of your net. And for a while I realized that won't be anything. And so it was supposed to be a side hustle. And, I'd secured a very, very, very minimal amount of equipment that wasn't the same equipment that I had learned on. It was so basic and minimal. And it turns out I don't use much of that anymore. It wasn't necessarily what I needed to get started in a full-fledged business. It was what I needed to play around. And, keep in mind, I had a full-time job and 2 children. I didn't have a lot of time to play around.
Yeah. And do you remember the first time you sold a hat to somebody? Do you remember that specific event?
It was, I made 5 hats when I was apprenticing for different people. One was the brilliant guy who did my brand, who's a great friend of mine in Arkansas. And then there were a few other people, but I had help with all those. I think I made myself the first hat just to see if I could pull it off. But what was crazy was the hat company that had been here before had closed up shop 4 years before that. And I knew everyone in town by this point. And I was I was working in the back of the shop of the woman who had started that company. So like all these people were flocking, and the brand was so beautiful. People were just so excited for me. And so I had a line at the door before I knew what I was doing by like a year.
And do you credit that to your skills as a hat maker or your skills as and I don't mean it like skills as a relationship builder. And I don't mean like you're out there purposely, I'm going to make this friend for this reason, but you're personable, you know how to build relationships, or was it some combo of the two?
It was certainly not my skill. It was not my skill in hat making. It was my relationships. It was that has always been a gift to me, which is obviously why I was gifted in sales. Mm-hmm. But those relationships have always been authentically made and built. Yeah. And it was the relationships and that I had, not only I had, but that Marilyn had from the shop previous to me. It was the brand, how beautiful the brand was. And I learned what happened. About 2 weeks after I moved into this building to do it as a side hustle, the company I was working for folded kind of overnight and left me with no warning. And so it was on. And there was just a lot of time where, what would have come easy to someone else did not come easy to me, but I just did not have any choice.
What year was that?
That was 2018.
Okay. So you went all in, and how did it go? I mean, how long did it take for the momentum? I mean, it sounds like you had a line of people, there was demand, but making a lot, all of a sudden you're going from doing it on the side, kind of when you can fit it in or when, making a certain number of hats. And then I would imagine your volume went way up. it becomes, you're all of a sudden the stakes are very high that it works. I mean, how did that kind of change your thoughts on the whole thing? Did it make it less fun, more fun? Didn't matter whether it's fun or not because you got to do it anyway. I mean, how did it go?
Bingo. That last one.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly what happened. I just didn't have any choice. I mean, I was too far in, and it was the right thing, and I knew it. But if I'm being honest, I'm having fun now. I've been having fun in the last year, maybe 2, but it wasn't that fun for me. I was proud of myself, but again, I was single momming, and from the get-go, I knew that I still wanted to go home when they got home from school. I still wanted to carry them to school. I knew that. And so I knew that it was going to be a challenge for me to make it the kind of successful in terms of volume business that it could be, because I wanted to be present. It was quite challenging, to be honest with you. And it's something I'm just now sort of figuring out a rhythm about.
Well, and then there's the whole thing, of living in Jackson Hole. And when I was there, it was expensive, but it was affordable. I mean, like I lived in that dumpy duplex with my buddy, and it was like a kind of piece of junk frat house, just a dump, and we lived in there, but it was affordable and it worked, and it was, and there were a lot of people living there like that. But, starting, I guess it really went to overdrive during the pandemic, but that place has gotten more and more out of control to the point that, correct me if you disagree, but it seems like a Wyoming version of Aspen, Colorado at this point. And so, as you're building your business and making a living and getting this thing going while also trying to be the most focused mom you can be, the price of living in that town is just going through the damn roof. So how did you think about that?
What's crazy is I didn't have to think about it at the time. That was a blessing. Again, I had no debt. Nice. I had a paid for car. I was living our housing was totally secured. Thank God it wasn't something I had to think about in addition to all of the rest. So I felt pretty secure with financially where I was. It wasn't because I was making so much money. It was because I had such a low overhead, which is a simple life that, I'd love to get back to if possible at some point. Now it's an issue. It's become a bigger issue since COVID, obviously, like all the places have. I ended up getting remarried about almost 4 years ago. And at that time, it was time to move out of the cabin because I'm remarried now. And so we got married in 2019, and in 2020, obviously, is when the pandemic happened. And so we had intended to purchase a home here then. And overnight, it was just unattainable. Yeah. So I would say my issues with that started when that happened. Really, I mean, I've noticed it's very Aspen-like for sure for years since Instagram started tagging every little tiny little place, or Instagram bloggers, I should say. But yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem, and we're committed to hanging on through when our kids graduate. But after that, we'd like to move over to the other side of the Tetons where life is a little calmer, and we'll see how that all shakes out.
Because your kids, what generation are they of being from Jackson Hole?
They are 6th generation Jacksonites.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah. So we'd like to keep them here, in school, and intend to do that. And we love it here. I have such a wonderful community here. I have no complaints, but except the cost of living is a bit out of touch and out of reach.
There's a guy that I want to get on the podcast. We were actually supposed to do a podcast right when the pandemic hit, and we had to cancel it. And we just haven't made it happen. But he wrote that book called Billionaire Wilderness, about Jackson, and he was from a blue collar family in Wyoming, but he was a Yale professor, and so he was able to get into all these fancy parties and stuff in Jackson Hole. And really, I haven't read the book all the way through, but I've heard great things about it, and I want to dig deeper into that on this podcast because I think it's is crazy. I mean, it's just great. And that Heather Hansman, I had her on here for her second book called Powder Days. And she talks about that inequity in ski towns, and it's super interesting thing to think about. I guess super interesting for somebody like me on the outside, super frustrating for everybody else.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I've had my bouts with frustration, but I am really trying to live in a space of just gratitude right now and kind of going with the flow as best I can. I found that keeps my anxiety at a lower point.
Do you do anything to help with that? Like, for the sake of my family, I've got a pretty consistent meditation practice that I never would have imagined I'd be the type of person to meditate, but it's very important. And then, I'm always reading all these different books about all that kind of stuff. How do you, is there any kind of practice or resources you have for keeping your mind in a even keel? I pray a lot. I read a lot, and I hike a lot. Nice.
I would say just moving in the mountains is huge for me. Being outside all year round, making myself go out in the, frigid below zero temperatures. I'm a big hiker. So I would say those three things. And you can ask my husband, he may say they're not working.
They never work. That's the thing is like, that's this woman, she's a Buddhist nun. I read a lot of her stuff, Pema Chodron, and there's one of her essays. She's like, just so you know, you're never going to get it all figured out.
That's right.
You're never going to solve all the problems.
That's right.
You mentioned your community in Jackson, and then that reminded me of just the kind of community of makers that you seem to have surrounded yourself with. I know that you and Jillian Lakuski, Noisy Plume, are close and work together. And then like at the Old Salt Festival, there was just this huge tent full of all these like-minded makers, all doing just really, really awesome stuff and all really awesome people. And so I was wondering how much has that community of makers kind of helped you in your both creative and business journey? Because it seems like you've got a really good community there that you've built, but not necessarily in Jackson Hole, through the power of the internet, kind of all over the West. But how important have those people been to your journey?
Vitally important. I was so honored to be in, and really surprised to be invited to that. Kate Mannix had been in my shop the fall before and invited me pretty early on, and I was really surprised and honored. But yeah, vitally important to see really well-made jewelry and leather goods and, silk scarves, all the things, my girlfriend's clothing brand. Yeah, vitally important to surround myself. And it's all just happened very organically. I mean, Jillian just pulled up at my shop one day 5 years ago or 4 years ago. Whatever.
Oh, really?
She just pulled up in the front and said, hi.
She's so awesome.
Make me a hat just like yours. So we are fast friends, super good friends. And she's actually coming for a pop-up at my shop this weekend.
Oh, nice.
Not this weekend, excuse me, next weekend on the 15th. And yeah, I'm just honored. I told you when we were talking at first, I suffer from a little bit of imposter syndrome, but I have really worked hard to be a quality maker. I would say, the things that are really important to me are slow living, being a mother and being a really quality maker, so that if any hat maker were to come into my shop and look at how my sweatband's sewn in or, how my felt is pounced, that they would approve, and think that I did quality work, and that if my customers, are looking at the hats, and believe me, there were some early on that don't fall into this category. And I've tried to reach out to all those people and say, hey, send that back if you need to. Mm-hmm. I know I wasn't that good in the beginning, but I have a lot to learn. And I feel like being around these makers is teaching me always about just craftsmanship and slow living and family and land and all those. We all have that in common. And it's such a huge gift to be able to be included in that group.
We were talking before we started recording about the imposter syndrome and how it's kind of you're obviously making some of the most high quality work you can find, as evidenced by that tent that you were in where everybody else is doing the same thing. They're not just slinging out invitations to some random person, but there's something about that imposter syndrome that I think is good to have. There's a book by Adam Grant called Think Again, where he talks about having that imposter syndrome, it keeps you humble and it keeps you curious and it keeps you knowing that you can learn more. And so like, even though you've obviously got the technical skills, I'm a big fan of imposter syndrome. Although Bex Frucht scolded me at the event for being too self-deprecating and saying, so I guess there's a fine line. When you're, so like at Old Salt or at this pop-up event that you're doing with Jillian or any of these other events you do you ever stop and look around and see that you are such a skilled artisan and such a skilled maker, and you're surrounded by all these other people that are also extremely, extremely skilled. And then you look around and you think, I didn't know I was FaceTiming my mom to learn how to sew. I'm an insurance salesman like that. And now you have from Arkansas and now you are a fixture in the West and you're a highly, highly, highly skilled and highly respected craftswoman, craftsperson? Anyway,
I'm not particular.
We'll say craftsperson. And do you ever look around and just be like, what the hell is going on here? Like what happened?
I mean, I'm certainly honored and humbled to be, when we do these markets, even locally, sometimes we don't have time to get our booth set up, and it blows, I have a team of people that help me with these things. And they say, do you think you're going to need me? I'm like, I never know. I don't have any idea if we are going to be slammed or twiddling our thumbs. I don't know. But inevitably, so far, and this could change, but so far, they just line up. And I don't understand why. I really don't. But I'm so grateful for it. I do wonder that all the time.
I know several reasons why. I don't know all the reasons, but I think one, you work your ass off. You there's no substitute for that. You bust your ass. And then I think two is that you're extremely authentic, and that kind of stuff just can't be faked. Those are the kind of things that somebody might be able to fake it for a little while, but I think that kind of energy attracts other people who are of a similar mindset. And I'm not saying I'm good at anything, but I do I'm good at working hard and not quitting. And I'm too dumb to be anything other than act like myself. And so I think that's probably one reason that our orbits, collided at some point. And everybody else, everybody at Old Salt was the exact same way. There was nobody there that was full of shit or like posturing or trying to be too cool for school. Or if they were, I didn't see them.
No, I didn't either. What a wonderful event. I'm still reeling from that. But Ed, you're magnetic, and that's why people want to be on your podcast. And don't beat yourself up.
Well, don't tell them the behind the scenes stuff.
Same. I remember one time I got on a plane last year, a couple of years ago, and I asked to put my hat in the closet, and the flight attendant said, "Sure, there's room for you." And then she said, "Are you Sing Hat Company?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." I was so shocked that anyone knew who I was. And she said, "Well, this other flight attendant she's really shy, but she is super excited that this is you." And I was like, that's so funny. I scolded my kids too hard this morning. Like, I'm so average. I'm so normal.
That is so cool.
I had the same things you had this morning before you went to work, and I'm not special, but it's really sweet that people notice your work, and it is really heartwarming.
Oh yeah. I mean, 100%, especially when it's work that's positive and, and makes people's life better and kind of aspirational like yours is. And so it's, I don't know. I love hearing that. That's really cool. So I imagine you get this question a decent amount, but when people that have aspirations of being a maker, whether that's making hats or making anything that requires craftsmanship, what advice do you give young people? Not young people, any people.
Well, gosh, I mean, in the hat business, it's so odd because we are in a shortage of felt and have been really feeling the squeeze on this since before the pandemic. And so during the pandemic, it seems like everybody decided to be a hat maker. And so we just really don't have enough felt to supply the current hat making industry. And then equipment, is very difficult to find. or takes a really long time. And some of it's not even made anymore. I mean, I have pieces of equipment from the late 1800s, early 1900s. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm not always that encouraging, but not because I don't think people shouldn't reach for their goals. I'm asked a lot if I would do an apprenticeship. And number one, I don't feel like I know enough. I have taught part of what I know to a couple of different people, but only after they hustled so hard for so long and had everything in their shop and were like, okay, what about now?
Yeah.
And I just admired their grit, and I said yes. But in general, I guess I try to discourage it a little bit in hat making because I'm afraid I don't want to take someone's money and let them pay me to apprentice them. One, I haven't been in the business long enough and I don't know enough. And two, I feel like I'd be taking their money and sending them out there to despair. Mm-hmm. So while I do believe people who have enough grit can figure these things out if they have a mind to, or have been given a call on their life, like I feel like I have been given, there will always be equipment you can find if you dig hard enough. I'm just not somebody who's encouraging myself teaching that because of those things.
No, I think that's wise. And I think people need to hear that, I think in some ways it's a self-selecting thing where there's, if you say 100 people hear that, there's one of them that really, 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 really wants to do it and ain't going to quit, and they're going to figure it out.
Yeah, they're going to do it anyway.
I think I love hearing that. So I don't know if you even think about things this way, but what's your vision for the company? I mean, you said you're feeling, you're in a good spot now with it, and you've obviously have got built up this loyalty from customers, but then also from fellow makers. And it seems like things are trending in a really good direction. Do you think about 5 years out, or are you just kind of head down and let's keep cranking on this thing?
I do think about 5 years out, and I would say that not a lot has changed, though I have gone through some different scenarios about what could happen in these next 5 years. I really love making hats. It's a super physical job, mm-hmm. and I'm 50 years old. So I do have a couple of folks in my shop that help in certain areas, here and there. I definitely do, blocking and pouncing and pressing and all the different things that hat making requires. But I also have a couple of people that step in and help with that when I need it. And so I'm just in a really good rhythm right now. I've kind of always likened myself, this sounds really funny, but to a dive, kind of a dive place in the middle of nowhere where only, the food and drinks are great, but only, 10 to 20 people can fit inside, but there's always a line at the door. Yeah. And
that's a good spot to be in.
Yeah. I really just want to continue that. I mean, I'm not trying to grow, and I'm obviously need to keep the tension in business that I have going because I need to make a living. And this allows me some freedom of time and some, freedom of schedule to be with my kids. I just feel like I'm in a good spot, and it's a tension to be managed, but man, this is a sweet spot.
That's all. Well, you've earned it. I mean, it's very clear from this conversation, you busted your ass. And so it's
thank
awesome.
you. I'm a big fan of slow living, slow fashion, small batch, quality craftsmanship, heirloom quality products. And I just don't know how you can do that quickly.
I don't think you can. I mean, I think that's part of the whole deal. It's like I had a really, really cool woman on the podcast a few months ago, Kathy Sever. She's from Fort Lonesome in Austin, and she does chain stitching, and it's similar in a lot of ways to your line of work because she's using very, very old machines that have to be rebuilt, and it's all by hand, and it's just very, by definition, it takes a long time, and it's very intricate, and you just can't, no matter what the AI or the outsourcing to China or whatever wants you to believe, you cannot do it quickly. At least, I mean, there are ways, I would imagine there are ways to evolve a business where that might be a portion of it, but at the core of what you're doing now, it's you, and it's slow, and it's built with, this attention to detail and quality, and with this love that just cannot be outsourced. At least that's my opinion. I'm not an expert.
Yeah, thank you. And and it's by appointment only. So when you come in, it's an experience, and you're not in a rush, and there aren't 14 people vying for my time. And I hope it's working. Hope it's working out for folks.
Seems like it. You've listened to enough of these podcasts to know that I'm always obsessed with books, different resources, things that have kind of played a role in turning you into the person that you are now. I used to always just want to be, I was kind of obsessed with books about the American West, which in a lot of ways I still am, but I'm also interested in just any books, any movies, any kind of art that may have been influential to you and that you credit with maybe helping you along this really cool journey you've been on.
Yeah, I read a lot of books about business. To be honest, I listen to a lot of books because my hands are always busy here, so I'm always listening to books. But I love Brene Brown. I'm not a natural born leader, I don't think, and so I always tell my team, y'all might be leading me here and there. I'm learning, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm sure I'm going to mess this up. But I want to be a quality leader, so dare to lead. I love all the Brene Brown stuff.
Yeah.
The War of Art.
Ooh, that's a great one.
I love that. Loved that book. Helped me know just to come in and sit and just work when I don't feel creative. Just come in and have systems.
Yes.
I love Atomic Habits.
I love that too.
I loved Atomic Habits. It really helped me set some things in place. Again, all about systems. This little simple book, Chop Wood, Carry Water.
I've heard of that.
I cannot remember the author of that book. And then because I can tend to move over into accidental hustle, this book, Wintering, The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times, has been a book I've read the last few winters. And it's just a book about solace and rest, and something I try to do to recharge in the winter times. So those are some great books I've read.
Those are great. Those are all great. I've heard of Wintering, I can't remember where I heard of it, but I need to read that. And then War of Art is just invaluable, I think.
Really, really great book.
So last question, I think it's funny coming off that Old Salt Festival, because when I think about the people that listen to this podcast, I think of the type of person that was at that event, in a weird way, it was almost like a gathering of a lot of the different energies that I when I imagine who the type of people that are listening, I imagine people like that were there.
Sure.
And so knowing that that's kind of the people that listen to this thing, do you have any kind of words of wisdom or final parting words for those folks?
Well, I'd be probably trying to gain wisdom from them, is the truth. But I would just say there's no right way to do any of these endeavors, any of these maker endeavors, or, there's no right way to do it. And, if you have enough grit and hustle, you can find a way to do about anything you want to do. I mean, that's kind of what I've always done.
Yeah, you have. Where can people connect with you online? Where's the best place?
I'm at singhatco.com, and I'm at Sing Hat Company on Instagram.
Awesome. So inspiring. I want this to be the first of many conversations. Really, you're awesome. This is just so fun. And I'm so glad we got to have this. It would have been weird if I'd cornered you at that festival and asked you all these questions. So, and a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing this. So I really appreciate it. Big fan of you and everything you do. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Gosh, Ed, I'm so honored to be here. Thanks so much. And so happy to meet you in person, and look forward to a long relationship.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.